Maybe you watch Severance and you just can't help but feel like you missed some of the deep, key, hidden themes or some clues that were in season one and season two. I do think Mark's past, which is presented to us more thoroughly in season two, might be key to helping us understand what's coming in season three. Is it a coincidence that whenever we look at some of the questions that Severance is asking us as an audience, we keep running into ideas that were posited by two 18th century German intellectuals? I think not. Do you remember what Mark's job was, or more specifically, what he specialized in prior to working for Lumen? Oh, that's right, World War I history. We've been chatting about how this show gives us an opportunity to rethink our relationship to work, or the story we tell ourselves about the work we do. Critiquing this can be life-changing, especially as more and more corporations try to entice you to have a life at work and to work from home. So 18th century Max Weber, brilliant intellectual guy, he's running around and he's flipping these ideas about society, capital, and religion on their heads. He comes up against Karl Marx and says, look, religion is not an opiate used to justify the masses who are being put through this capitalistic structure. Religion and the mind, these thoughts, are where that whole structure for capitalism even originates from in the first place. The mind and its thoughts, not money, not capital, are the origin points for this industrial world that is rapidly solidifying around him. When we look at the world of Severance and we see Mark and all these other innies, these are not people that were forced into this job through this sheer force of science or capital or the structure of the corporation itself. No, these were whole individual people who mentally first acquiesced to what Lumen promised their minds intellectually and I guess you could say spiritually, right? These were people who were sold the idea of Lumen, the idea of Severance. Lumen's workforce, whether they're severed or not, is not maintained or controlled through a structure that then puts on the whole Kier mythology and ideology around it on top of all that. No, it originates from the Kier ideology. You have all these people who are willingly part of this because they believe in either what the company says about itself or they believe that the work they do is important and it matters even if it's mysterious. When we first watched season one, it was really tempting to look at the Kier ideology and say, okay, this came up after the company solidified itself. It came up after everything was in place. But the more we dived into season two, we realized, oh no, there was this idea and this desire and this mindset that existed long before the first Severance chip even was created. Is the religion of Kier molded and adjusted to fit the current needs of the company? Absolutely. There's a lot of myth making going on. But there's a very clear beginning that runs through all of this, which is Kier, who meets his wife Imogene, have this idea, they have this belief of what it is to work and what it is to be in community, and they are determined to see that through. No matter what the company is ultimately working on, no matter what products they've worked on, because that's changed over the years, they're a biopharmaceutical company, the belief and the structure has stayed the same. That's because the company rises out of the philosophy of Kier. It is not something that is retroactively created to justify it. Max would love that the company does not come out of the capital or the science, but the belief itself. It's a bit of a shock to us in season two when we realize this guy, Kier Egan, ran the company for 74 years as CEO and he never saw a severance chip with his own two eyes. Part of what makes season two so much scarier is when we realize that this religion of Kier is actually what's grounding all of this. The science, the shame, the control tactics, and the work ethic, they all rise from this unshakable belief that all these different people have. So how do we connect all this? Well, we get a flashback in season two where Mark meets Gemma for the first time at Gans College, where they both work. And as they trade stories about what they do and who they are, he reveals he's a World War I history professor. He teaches history and not just any history. That was a choice by the screenwriters. World War I was also known as the Great War. This is before we knew there was going to be a second World War. This war is critical to the type of person that Max Weber, the philosopher in real life, would eventually become, just like it is with Mark and his innie who partakes and leads the macro-dat uprising. At this point, there's been so many little rebellions going on that it might be hard to remember which one this is, but the macro-dat uprising is when all the innies work together to unsever out in real life so they could have an idea about what their outies' lives are like and what they're missing out there. Max Weber was initially a great proponent of World War I. He even called it splendid, but then something happened as time went on. Around 1915, he grew disillusioned with the whole thing. He initially saw Germany's expansion efforts as favorable, but then came to criticize them. He had been whipped up by patriotism and this sense of nationalism that war brings, right? It brings people together. But as it started to touch more and more people he knew, and he saw people coming home injured and broken, and as the war became one of the most bloody carnages that the world had ever seen, he really took stock of what an autocratic government was doing to his country and the world. As a student in the 1890s, he'd been all for German imperialism, but around 1915, 1916, he breaks rank with all the other intellectuals who had also been supporting the Great War. Max then leans into these left-leaning politics, he starts organizing, and becomes known as the mind who brings sociology to Germany, and even considered one of the fathers of sociology. This was, of course, a big deal at the time because most of Germany's intellectual elite had been focused on problems of nationalism. What I find fascinating is how Max's historical story arc mirrors Mark Scout's in so many ways. Mark was all in with his outer life until he lost his wife. He has this personal tragedy and then decides to throw himself into a completely different organization, works with Lumen, decides to be a historian for them and expand their cause and work. But then what happens? He watches this bloody loss of his friend Petey. He then has this flush of falling in love with Helly and everything feels great. He grows disillusioned with Lumen and then chooses to express a sense of individuality and not this big corporate nationalism, we could say. This internal sense of self is enough to form an uprising and break away from Lumen. And then he chooses, okay, this is a spoiler alert, so stop if you haven't seen it. Okay, you had enough time. He chooses to run off with Helly. Where to? We don't know. We're going to find out in season 3. Each season builds up and upon this question of who are you? I'm guessing that in season 3, we'll be asking, what do you do with the answer to that question? Because now we're dealing with 3 competing desires, right? You've got Outie Mark, you've got Innie Mark, and you've got Lumen, the company itself. Up to this point, the battle had between the entirety or the totality of Mark and the company. And now it's split in 3. And while it might be tempting for us as audience members to immediately go, oh, that'll make it harder for Lumen, you have to remember they've had practice with this. They have split Gemma into multiple Innies. They are totally in control of multiple severed versions of her. They have no problem doing that. They have the capability to do this. Where does all that control originate from? The mind. If Max Faber were alive, I think you'd really like this show. Up to this point, a lot of us are asking, what are we going to find when Cold Harbor ends? What is the product? What is the point of Lumen? And I think what we've discovered is Severance is not an opiate to get people to do something. Severance, the severance chip, the severance process, it is the product itself. It is the origin point. We have barely scratched the surface, of course, with the different German philosophies behind the show. So I will be back and let me know what you think and how you've been thinking about the question that Severance poses to you as an audience member in your own life.